Hello guys, so I'm just going to try and show you how you can read data into R. So the first thing you want to do in any R session is probably to set your working directory. So I'm just going to use the menus to do that here. Menus, set working directory, choose a directory, and I'm going to pick an O6C directory that I've got, which has a number of files in it. So I'm just going to click select the folder, and then you can see in the console window here we've got the actual command that R ran as I was using the menu commands, and you could have just written that in yourself without having to use the menu commands. So directory just means folder in R, by the way. So I'm going to show you two basic ways to read data into RStudio. The first of these is using a menu command, and the second way is extremely versatile. So the first way is probably the simplest if you've never used R before, or you're unfamiliar in general with sort of command line setups. So what we're going to do is click on the import dataset button here, and then from text file, and then it's opened up my working directory where I set earlier, and now I can choose a file. So I'm going to read in this one here, bwing.txt, which is just a file of bwing lengths, or is it widths? I can't remember now. Okay. So the name here is the name that R is going to use to give to the data frame that it's reading that data into. So the data frame is just a data structure, which is how you're going to use the data in R. It's not the actual file of data. So R has correctly guessed that your data do not have a header. There's no column name at the top of this file. And it's made some other good guesses about what kind of space there might be between values, white space it says here. So this part here is what the input file looks like, and the lower part is what the data frame is going to look like. So by default, it's going to give your first variable the name v1 for variable 1, because there's no actual column name in here. So I'm just going to click import now. And you can see that it's read the data into a data frame. So this is what we call a data frame. It's got this little blue arrowy thing here. And you can see the first column in that data frame is called V1. And it's actually opened a view of that data frame for me as well. So the data within a data frame you access with its variable name. So one of the important things to realise is that the data in the data frame you can change, but it doesn't change the underlying data in the text file. So if I get myself a script here to do some stuff. So let's say I'm going to take that variable, v1, and I'm just going to set it so that it's the same variable but doubled. So that says make the values in this column, v1, equal to what the values are currently, multiplied by 2. So I click run here. So it's actually doubled the values, and you can see in this data frame here it's doubled the values. But if I go and look at the actual text file here, which will open in R for me, I can look at, you see the values are still exactly the same as they were before, 3.6. So it's only changed the representation, if you like, of the data inside R. So let's try and do a file with a little bit more structure to it. So I'm going to choose a file which has a different separator. So let's go import dataset from text file, data. I'm going to choose this file here called chaff.txt. So this is the weight of male and female chaffinches. So I open. So you can see that in this case, R again has correctly guessed that the separator, the thing that separates the values, is a tab space. And it's also correctly guessed that there are headers this time. So this is the input file, and this is what it's going to look like as a data frame, which looks pretty good. That's how we want it to look. I can override the settings. So I can change this if I like to a comma, so that I'm telling R that the separator between the values is actually a comma. So if I do that, you see the input file is going to be exactly the same. But what happens now to the data frame is, because there's no comma between the first columns, the first values, the labels, it assumes they're all one word. So it thinks the column name is females.males because it had a space between it, just puts a dot. So we don't want that. We want to let it do the default tab, and then we're going to click import. Okay, and then you've opened a view of the data again here. Okay, so now we're having the second way to read data in. So this is actually the much more useful way in the long term. In actual fact, the import menu uses this method, but it writes the code for you without you being able to having to write it yourself, as you might be able to tell from the console window here. So I'll go back to my script file. So in order to read a file in, I'm going to use a method called read.table. Okay, so if my file is in my working directory, all I need to do is give the file name that it's in. So let's say I do, it's bwing.txt in quotes. Oops, missed the G out there. So I'm going to assign this to a data frame, and I'm going to make this one called bees, because I previously read that into a data frame called bwing. So now I'm just going to give it a different name so that we can see the different effects. So now I click run, and you can see it's complaining that it doesn't know where that file is. And that's because the bwing text file is not in my current working directory. So to be able to see the files in that I can see from my working directory, I can type dir. So you can see I haven't got the file in that list, but I have got a folder called data, and that's where the file is. So if I in fact edit this and write data /, so this tells you what the relative path is to that file, and then run it, you're going to find that it does run. I'll get rid of that command there too. So now I've read that into a different data frame, the same data into a different data frame, and you can see they're the same, apart from those values were doubled where I doubled it earlier. So I need to tell R where the file was relative to my working directory. So now let's try and read chaff.txt in again. So I'm going to need some very similar code. So I'm going to copy and paste this code here. I'm going to change this name to chaff. Whoops. And I'm going to call it chaff2 because I've already got a data frame called chaff. Okay, so let's try and read this in this time. Seems to have read in successfully. But if I actually look at how chaff2 looks compared to the first chaff that I read in, so remember this first one, that looks right. We've got 2 columns, males and females, with 20 values in each column. Whereas if I look at this one, oh, now they're called V1 and V2, and it says they're factors, so that means character strings instead of actual numbers. So the reason for that is that we did not tell R that the header was true. So when we read in using read.table, we want to specify all the arguments we can. So you can get what those arguments are by pressing the tab key. So there's header, and the default is that header equals false. So I'm going to make header equals true. And now when I run that, it's going to overwrite this file here. You see it's overwritten chaff2 now correctly. And now I've got a copy, a data frame copy of that data set, which has been read incorrectly. So you need to know where your files are and what kind of format they're in before you can read them in almost any method. So there are very many ways to use read.table, but we'll cover those in another time.